This is the kind of stuff that you have to do in a company, or when you run a business, or when you work for a client. All right, deploying AI apps to the cloud. How do you actually do this? Very important topic and often overlooked in video tutorials. You might have been playing around with OpenAI, you have some Python scripts, you maybe hooked it all up via LangChain, and now you have something cool running locally. But how do you actually take that to the next step, deploy it to a server where users can access it? And this way, you can turn that local thing, that local app that you were building into an end-to-end solution. And you could either sell this as a product or sell this as a service to potential clients. And now we are going to do this in Microsoft Azure, but you can also do this in AWS or the Google Cloud Platform. So the principles are the same. So that is really what I want to show you in this video, and that is what I want you to understand. So like I've said, it will be a Slack bot on Azure, but think of it as an AI app and a cloud platform. And if you understand that, you can basically take any AI app and any cloud platform, and you should be able to figure out how to do this, especially with some ChatGPT help in between. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so like I've said, I will show you how to do this step by step, and this will also be available on GitHub. So we will continue where we left off on the LangChain experiments repository. But right now we are going to switch to the deployment branch, because here there is an updated README, as you can see, with all the steps that I will be walking you through. And also we updated some of the code within the app.py over here to make it work with this new configuration. So in the last video, we created Emma, a personal assistant that can help me to draft email replies. And that is, or she is instructed to do that through a simple function over here called draft email, where we have a prompt template over here and then use LangChain to chain it all together. And that will give us a response, which will be updated using the app over here that we created using Flask. But like I've said, the function over here can be anything. So within our Slack app, we can instruct Emma to do basically anything that we can with help of GPT and OpenAI. So we can really get creative here. Here is a brief introduction. I've covered most of that in the introduction to this video of what we're going to do. So you can read over that, and also like why it's important to understand this, to be able to deliver end-to-end solutions, which means that you are able to take an idea from conception to completion. And like I've said, this is a really valuable skill to have, and you can really bridge the gap between data science and software engineering if you understand this. So we are going to do this using Azure. So first we have to sign up for Azure, create an account if you don't have one already, and you will get $200 of credits for free if you create a new account. So you can test this out and play around. So what I will do is I will show you how to do this. So I'll walk you through this process so you can follow along with every step that I do. So I'm going to create a new account here. So, and we're now inside a brand new Azure account. And here you can see you can start a free Azure trial and get $200 of credits. So if you want to do this, I already have a subscription, so I'm not going to show you how to. You can click on start here, you have to fill in some information, and then you can get started. But right now, the next step would be to create a resource group within your new Azure environment. And a resource group is basically a top level directory that you can use within Azure to store services, resources, anything related to your project. So I always describe it as like a folder that you store everything for your project in. And now we are going to create a resource group called LangChain experiments, similar to the GitHub repository. So I'm going to go back to Azure over here, copying it, and then I go to resource group over here. And from here, I can say, hey, I want to create a new resource group. So like I've said, top level directory basically of your project. So I have an Azure subscription over here that you can select. And then I am going to name the resource group LangChain experiments. And for me, I'm going to select West Europe, but you should pick the region that is closest to your location. That makes the most sense. And then I click review, create, and then create. So this will create a resource group for us. And if we click on this, it's still empty, meaning there's nothing in here. So this is basically similar to how you create a folder before you start a project locally on your drive. And we can now add put some stuff into this project. So that will be the next step, and that is create an app service. And an app service is a fully managed platform for building, deploying, and scaling your web applications. And Azure and also like AWS or Google Cloud make this really convenient in a sense that you can just in a few clicks have your own web application running, and then it's available via a URL in the browser. So we're going to create a new app service. So how do we do that? So we can do it multiple ways, but the most straightforward step right now would be to say create resources inside the LangChain resource group. And then we have to list the marketplace of everything, all the pieces, all the services that you can use within Azure. But we are going to search for an app service, and we are going to select the web app. So this is the resource that we have to create. So we are going to create that, and then it will already select the correct resource group over here because we have initiated this creation from within the resource group. But make sure you select the right resource group over here. And now we have to give our app a name. And now this name has to be globally unique across all Azure websites. So not just within your own subscription, but globally. So we can call it something like Slack GPT app, and that is already in use. And then let's see, we add 2. So we call it Slack GPT app 2. And then here are some important steps. So coming back to the documentation over here, we have to select publish the code, select the correct Python version, and then the region. Okay, so we do code, runtime will be Python 3.8 in my case, and then region again, we do West Europe. And here again, make sure to take the region that is closest to you. And now here we are going to create a pricing plan for our server. So as you can see over here, you need to select an appropriate service plan. And what this basically means is that Azure Microsoft will provide you with a server, a dedicated space where you can install basically your files and will keep it running. And for that, you need a plan. And it will by default provide you with a name. So ASP, LangChain, and then we'll just add a code. That is fine for now. And then make sure to check the pricing plan, because here you can select the free, the basic, the premium, and depending on what plan you choose, of course, you get billed every hour. Now, remember, if you have the $200 worth of credit, you can play around with this, but do please note that this will cost some money because we are borrowing, renting resources from Microsoft basically. So for now, I'm just going to select the free plan. That is fine for now. And then I'm going to select review plus create. Select create again. And this will now create our web app for us. Now, this will take some time. So here it says deployment is in progress, and boom, there it is. Deployment succeeded. So we can go to the resource and now check it out. Okay, and now first few steps back to give you a brief rundown of what we're actually doing. If I go back to the home, you can now see that we have 2 items basically here. We have a LangChain experiment, which is a resource group, like I said, top level directory. And we have an app service called Slack GPT app 2, which is inside the LangChain experiments resource group. How do we know that? If we click on this, we can see, hey, we have the app service in here, and we also have the app service plan. So that is also available in here. All right, so that is really high level how Azure works, so you understand the individual components. Let me now get back to the app service. Now, the next thing that we have to do is we are going to deploy via a GitHub repository. And this is really convenient because this means we can change some stuff locally, then just commit it to GitHub and then trigger an action to do the redeployment of the actual application on this web server. So this is really awesome. So how we are going to do this is we are going to the Azure Deployment Center within our web app. So over here, you have the Deployment Center in the left menu. And if I come over here, I can now select the source. And for that, we can choose GitHub because I can use the repository over here because I'm the owner of this and I can connect it to my account. But you, of course, first have to clone this repository and then commit, push it to your own GitHub. And it's best if you delete the whole .github folder right now, because this is the folder where the workflow is in. and this is my workflow, and you will be creating your own workflow file in a bit. So it's best to completely get rid of this folder over here. So make sure you get rid of this entire directory and have all the other files in there. So that would be the whole deployment branch that you're seeing over here. All the files in here, you should create your own GitHub project with all the files before you can do this. Because now if we come over here, you can authorize your account. So you can click on this and then log in with your account and then accept the authorization. Okay, and then in my case, but you have to change this for your specific situation, is the organization will be my GitHub account, top level. Then the repository will be LangChain experiments since we're in there. And then the branch for me will be deployment. But please keep in mind the default is main. So if you create a new GitHub repository and you clone and push this, for example, or you fork it, then you will likely be on main. So then you have to select the main branch over here. And then make sure to select this, add a workflow. So this will create a workflow file within your project. And that you can also preview over here so you can see what that will look like, but that will be added to your GitHub repository, and GitHub will use that to trigger the deployment after committing and pushing everything. So we will need this later. All right, so that's it. And then you're going to hit save. So what this will now do is it will add the .github directory with the workflows to your repository. And you should have a file like this. So it's a YAML file and it will be the name of your app basically, and then also the branch. So this will either be main if you started fresh, or in my case, it's deployment. And this is the Slack GPT app that we're looking at. Okay, and now also make sure to come back to your project and then also make sure to pull everything. So you will pull it into your project. So now you can see that the GitHub folder is also in my project. So we created that externally. So Azure added that to our repository, and now we have to pull it in locally. And then you can check out the deployment file and you can see what's in there. So it should look something like this, and we will update that in a bit. All right, but now for now on to the next step, and that is creating the startup.txt file. So that should already be in the project, but just to make sure, you should have a startup.txt in the root of your directory, your repository, and it should have the following command. And we are going to use this to basically instruct Azure, instruct the web application on what to do when we start the app. And the most important thing is that we have to point it to our Flask app. And we do that by specifying a directory. So saying, hey, it's in the Slack folder. So it's over here. It's in the file app.py, and our Flask application is called Flask app. And it's really important to understand the nuances here. So here you can see we initialize a Flask app and call it Flask_app. So that is what this is referring to. App over here is referring to the Python file app.py, and the directory here is referring to Slack. So make sure you have everything exactly like this. And if you make changes, so for example, if you change the folder name or you change the app name or you put it into a different folder, that you change the files over here. Otherwise, it won't work. That was the startup.txt file. And now we have to update the startup command in Azure. And we basically have to tell that, hey, whenever you start this app, you should look for this file. And we do that by going to configuration, general settings, and then startup command in our web app. So in our Slack app over here, we go to configuration, then go to general settings. And then here you can see the startup command. And we do startup.txt and make sure to save that. And then we come back to step 2.3, and that is update the web app configuration with keys and secrets. Now, here is also a difference between working locally and on the cloud. So when we are working locally, we are using the .env file to store all of our secrets. So this is everything related to Slack. So bot token, sign-in secret, and bot user ID. But it's also our OpenAI API key that will be used as well, which we load through .env. But since we are not uploading the .env file to GitHub, Azure, and therefore our web app do not have access to this file and therefore also do not have access to the keys. So we have to do this manually and update it. And how do we do that? Well, we go to configuration again, but now to application settings. So that is the tab over here. And here we are going to add new settings. And now if you look at this screen, then you should already have one application setting over here. And that is something with deployment and that is set to 1. You should leave that there. But what you're going to add is the following. So that will be OpenAI API key, Slackbot token, everything basically that is in your .env file that we created already in the previous video where we created the Slackbot. So you should have this already. If not, refer back to my previous video, which I will link. So how does this work? Let's start off by the OpenAI API key. You come over here, you say, hey, new application string. You do the name, and then here, this is where you will put the value. You can just literally copy and paste this from your env file. So I can do whatever for now, just to show you how it works, and then it will store that. And continue to do that for all 4. So continue with like Slackbot, create a new application setting, and so on. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, make sure to save everything. And now what this will allow you to do is basically the application settings within your application are stored as environment variables. And then what happens is when we run this script, this part over here will basically do nothing because it doesn't have access to a .env file, but we can still get the variables from the environment because they are stored in the application settings. All right, and that brings us to step 3, and that is updating the workflow file. So in this section, we'll go over updating the GitHub Actions workflow to enable automated deployments. Like I've said, really convenient. And we'll configure this workflow to log in using the Azure CLI and then a service principal, and also update credentials again, and now in GitHub Action Secrets. So what we will do, step 1, is we are going to log into the Azure CLI using a service principal. So for that, you are going to update your workflow file. So what is that? That is the file over here. And you should basically create it so that it looks like my file over here. So if you go to your file, you won't have this piece in there because by default, Azure will not put it in here. But you're going to copy and paste and just put this in here. So this will allow us to log in via the Azure CLI. Okay, then next step is we are going to create a service principal. And if you want to learn more about how that exactly works, I would recommend looking it up, Googling it, but it's basically a security layer for your applications. So to create the service principal, we are going to take the following code over here, this long piece of code, but then make sure to replace your subscription ID with your actual subscription ID. So I'm going to copy this line over here, then come back to Azure. And from here, we're going to click on this little icon over here to start up the Azure Cloud Shell. And we'll run it in Bash, and we will select the subscription and create a storage. That is fine. So this is the Azure CLI command line interface that we can use to interact with our subscription using code, using Bash basically. So this will take some time to create the storage. So let's just wait for that. All right, and we're in. So what we are now going to do is we're going to paste the command that we just copied. So that is the whole line over here. But now please note that we have to update your subscription ID. Where do you find that? You scroll down from the home menu, so portal.azure.com, go to subscriptions. Here you can see your subscriptions, and here you can see your subscription ID. Now it's good to keep all of this information private. That's also why I created a demo account for this and not using my real subscription, but here you can see the ID. So we're going to copy this and then come back to the Azure CLI and then subscriptions, and then we put that in. So that should be it. And then one more thing to note, this is also a variable over here. So this is the name for your service principal. And in this case, my Slackbot app would be sufficient. So we're going to run that. And what that will do is it will create the service principal for us with the contributor role. And this is the information that we need. Now, this is also really information that you should keep secret. So I'm sharing it here, but I will delete this right after creating it. Because like I've said, a service principal is enhanced security for your application. We are going to copy this whole JSON response basically with ID, secret, everything. And now, come back to the documentation. We are going to store this in a variable called Azure Credentials, but now not in Azure, but in GitHub, because this is a communication basically the other way around. So Azure needs environment variables to run our script and connect with our APIs, but the GitHub workflow also needs access to our Azure subscription to trigger the workflow and the deployment basically. So how this works is now that we've copied all the information over here, we can scroll up to your GitHub repository, then go to settings. And then from here in the left menu under security, you can see secrets and variables. And here you can see actions. And what we are going to do, we are going to create the one over here basically, which is Azure Credentials. So what you'll do is new repository secret. Then you'll paste this in here and you'll say Azure _ credentials. And then you add the secret. I'm not going to do that because it's already in there, but that is how you create it. And now coming back to VS Code, what you can now see is we can reference the secrets.azure credentials here basically when we log in using the CLI. So that is how you set that up. And like I said, this is pretty advanced stuff and not a lot of people actually know how to do this properly. And that's also why I want to show you how you can do this. So that was step 3. So service principal added to the workflow, created the service principal, and then updated the secrets within GitHub. So now it's time to update the Python file. And if you clone the repository, you should already be good to go. But I just want to quickly cover the changes basically compared to the local setup that we were running for the Slack bot. So first of all, we now set the host to basically listen to all incoming connections by specifying 4 zeros. And then we also switched the port to 8000. So by default, Flask runs on port 5000. But when you deploy it to Azure, we have to specify to run on port 8000. So that is what you will see in the app coming over here all the way here. So that is what we've changed. And then also there is a verification in there again for enhanced security. So we have 2 functions. We have the verify Slack request and also require Slack verification. And by this, we're leveraging Slack's built-in verification, basically the signature, to verify using the sign-in secret. So the Slack sign-in secret, we're verifying the signature. This basically means that only you with access to the Slack sign-in secret can actually send messages to this bot, to this API endpoint basically. And the final piece to this puzzle is adding the actual decorator, meaning that we add the add require Slack verification to the Slack events. So you can also see that in the code right here. And what this does is it basically makes sure that we call the function before processing any requests from Slack to ensure that they are legitimate. And if you are at this point, we can actually deploy the whole application. So we can commit and push the changes to GitHub to trigger the deployment action. And we can reference the Azure log stream for debugging. All right, so how do we do this? Well, let me first scroll up and then go to actions over here. And here you can see all the previous actions that I was doing while I was creating this tutorial and testing everything out. But now what we can do, if we come back to VS Code and I come back to my app. So now let's make a quick change to this file. So let's, for example, say, hey, we are going to do a demo over here. So this will be the demo. And then now if we save this, go to our version control, we can see that we now have a change within app.py. So we made some changes and we can now say, hey, this is for demo purposes. And we can now commit and push this file. And now again, make sure that you are on the correct branch. I'm doing this on the deployment branch, but you'll likely be on main. And I can check that by going to the workflow file. You see, hey, it will trigger on this branch. And now I've also added some paths over here to basically avoid redeploying everything when I, for example, just update the README, but this is not required. So here you can say like, hey, only trigger the deployment if you see changes in the Slack folder, requirements.txt or startup.txt. So that's that, but make sure that for you it's main or it is the branch that you're working on. Okay, coming back over here, I am going to commit and push. What will happen right now is if I come back to the code, what I can see is that right now we have a new commit. And now if I come back to the actions, we can see that we're currently running a workflow. So that is the demo. So let's see what's going on. Okay, so it is now building the application, basically building the environment. And what is it doing? Well, it is doing what is stated over here. So the build phase is creating basically the Python environment on the Linux server that we've created, and then setting up the virtual environment, activating it, and installing the requirements.txt. So that is the build phase. Okay, that usually goes pretty quick. So you can see this is now successfully completed, and now we're in the deploy phase. And we can even click on this to see what's going on. So let's check. What is it doing over here? Deploy is over here. And here you can see that all the steps, and that is everything that's happening over here. So you can now see it's redeploying the web app. So if we now come back to web application over here, so this in the background should now be running. But like I've said, this is a demo environment. It's not the actual environment. But in your situation, what you can do right now is you can go to the log stream and open that, and then you can follow everything that's going on within the log stream. And it's finished, so it took a total of 4 minutes and 42 seconds. So here you can see build and deploy completed. Now let's come back to our documentation and see where we're at. So we just completed step 4, updating the Python file and deploying everything. So now the final step is updating the Slack app event subscription. So if you remember from the previous video about Slack, we changed the event subscription here with the ngrok URL. So that is how we were able to simulate the server basically. But now we have a real server with a real URL and endpoint. So now we have to change that. So what should you change it with? Well, you come back to your web app and you check the default domain, and that will be the name of your app, .azurewebsites.net. So you copy what's over here, and do mind, for me there is a 2 over here, but that is because this is the demo environment. The real environment that I'm using doesn't have the 2, so that is the Slack GPT app, and you put that in here. If this is not enabled yet, you put it on and then you change it, add in the new URL, and make sure you include the endpoint over here, so /slack/events. That corresponds with the URL over here. And then you should verify it, and it should get a green check. If that is not the case, your app is not correctly working, and you should go back and check maybe in the logs or any steps where you missed something. So if you get the green check, then the next thing you have to do is to subscribe to bot events, and then event name, make sure you are subscribed to the app mentioned over here. And again, this is all stuff that we did in the previous video. You can see more details over here on how to do that, but that is it. And that is the final step. So you should then save the changes. So now if you did everything correct and you followed all these steps, your Flask app is running, and now your Slack bot is also listening to event subscription on this URL. Now, the only thing that's left to do is validate and test whether everything is live. So coming back to Slack and the conversation here with Emma. So let's now see, after configuring everything, she's instructed to draft emails. We can basically ask her anything. So we say, hey Emma, how are you? What have you been up to? And Emma will respond immediately saying, sure, I'll get right on that. And she will now process this information through the OpenAI API and then say, hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Lately, I've been keeping busy with work and trying out some new hobbies like cooking and hiking. Interesting, Emma. How about you? What have you been up to? And again, not the best example, but Emma is alive and now on a server that is deployed in the cloud, that we can keep running even if we shut down our laptop, shut down our computer. Emma is still live, meaning that we can turn it into a product, sell it as a service to clients, or implement it, for example, for your job, for your team, so that's accessible everywhere. And now all that's left to do is basically configure, come up with new functions that you can instruct Emma or your personal assistant with. This is just one example, draft an email. And that is really what I want to get into in future videos. So right now, this brings us to the end of this tutorial. Emma has now access to one function, but I want to really explore, okay, how can we equip Emma with a toolkit of functions, and then basically through our wording, through our messaging in Slack, instruct Emma what function to take. So if you're interested in that, learning more about that, then definitely subscribe, stay tuned. That is what we will cover in future videos. But you now know how to deploy an AI app to the cloud using Python, Flask, and Azure. And like I've said, very valuable skill to have. And if you're now like, hey Dave, that's cool, I understand this, I see the value, I understand how you can implement end-to-end solutions like this, but how do I take it to the next level? How do I find projects? How do I find potential clients to work with? Well, if that sounds like you, then you should check out Data Freelancer. First link will be in the description. Here's a video that will explain more about what the Data Freelancer Mastermind is, but it's basically a group of people working together, data professionals, to work on profit, fulfillment, and freedom. We basically set you up to launch and scale a 6-figure freelancing business in data. If that sounds like you, but you don't know where to start, check this out, first link in the description. Alright, and that's it for this video. Please hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. It really helped me out, and you also let YouTube know that you want to see more content like this. So it's really a win-win and it's free. Alright, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.